What if, in a single night, the United States was hit harder than at Pearl Harbor, harder than on 9/11, but this time on 3 fronts at once? Imagine the sky over Guam glowing as dozens of Chinese DF-26 ballistic missiles crash down, Russian Kaliber cruise missiles streaking low toward Alaska, and Iranian forces scattering naval mines across the Strait of Hormuz. In less than 1 hour, America's global power projection hubs are burning, runways are cratered, fuel tanks explode into fireballs, and tankers carrying 20% of the world's oil supplies are suddenly trapped. This isn't just fantasy. Every weapon I just mentioned is real, already deployed, and trained on American assets right now. The DF-26 has a range of over 2,000 miles and is designed to sink carriers. Russia's Yasin-class submarines are armed with cruise missiles capable of flying under radar. Iran has the largest stockpile of naval mines in the Middle East and a proven record of using proxy forces to hit America's allies. But here's the critical question. Could a perfectly timed strike like this freeze Washington long enough for China to take Taiwan, for Russia to move into the Baltics, and for Iran to choke global energy flows? Or would the United States and its allies absorb the hit and swing the hammer back harder than ever before? Stay with me until the end, because every single detail you're about to hear could decide how the next world war might be fought. And if you love military history, strategy, and real updates on global defense, give this video a like, subscribe, and share it so I have the motivation to bring you the next deep dive into the world of modern warfare.
Now let's move into the part of the war that you and I can't see with our eyes, but it might be even more dangerous than missiles and tanks: cyber and space. Imagine waking up one morning and without a single bomb falling, your city is already paralyzed. The lights go out, gas pumps stop working, and container ships sit frozen outside the harbor because the cranes that unload them are locked in place by malware. That's exactly what years of quiet hacking could unleash in the opening minutes of a war. We've already seen glimpses of this. Back in 2010, the Stuxnet worm quietly sabotaged Iran's nuclear centrifuges. In Ukraine, Russian cyberattacks knocked out power grids in the middle of winter. If those were only small-scale examples, imagine the largest covert digital campaign in history being switched on all at once. Airports like JFK or Boston Logan would have to ground flights, thousands of passengers stranded, chaos without a single shot fired. And it doesn't stop on Earth. In orbit, the first missiles don't always target aircraft carriers or tanks, they target satellites. Russia and China both have anti-satellite weapons. We know China tested one back in 2007, shattering its own satellite and creating a cloud of space debris. A modern strike could knock out GPS relays or imaging satellites in seconds. That means American forces suddenly lose precision targeting, navigation becomes unreliable, and commanders are left fighting blind in a battlefield that demands speed. Here's my take. Cyber and space are the true first strike weapons of our time. Missiles and tanks make the headlines, but the first punches are likely to come as lines of malicious code or sudden blackouts in the night sky. And that's what keeps me awake, because unlike missiles, we often don't see these attacks until it's already too late. But America isn't helpless. The Pentagon is invested in resilient systems like M-code GPS, alternative navigation networks, and private constellations such as Starlink to patch gaps. Cyber Command drills constantly to keep hackers out and, when needed, to hit back. It's a cat-and-mouse game where the fastest to adapt wins. So when we think about future wars, it's not just about who has the most carriers or tanks, it's about who can keep their systems online when the invisible battlefield lights up. And that sets the stage perfectly for the next question. Once the shock and confusion hit, how quickly can the United States and NATO respond on the ground? Let's move there now.
When the first missiles hit Guam and Alaska, and when the lights begin to flicker across American cities, the instinctive question is, how fast can the United States actually respond? The truth is, the reaction begins almost instantaneously. NORAD scrambles F-22s over Alaska, interceptors roar into the sky, and the Pentagon quietly raises the DEFCON level, a step closer to full-scale war readiness. On Guam, Air Force engineers and Navy Seabees roll onto shattered runways with emergency gear, patching craters so that cargo planes and bombers can return within just 2 days. At sea, American submarines fan out silently, hunting the Russian boat that fired on Alaska. These moments feel chaotic, but they are rehearsed over and over precisely for this reason. But here's where the story widens. The instant America is hit, it's not standing alone. NATO, the largest military alliance in history, is bound by Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all. That clause has only been triggered once after the September 11th attacks. Imagine now, for the second time in history, every European capital lighting up in solidarity. Within days, the skies above Europe buzz with Eurofighter Typhoons, Rafales, and F-35s. Patriot and SAMP-T missile batteries switch on from Norway to Romania, and naval convoys begin their transatlantic voyage under destroyer escort. And here's my perspective. This is the moment when Moscow's gamble looks far less certain. Russia may hope to split NATO, but history shows otherwise. In World War II, when German U-boats tried to starve Britain by sinking convoys, it was American escorts and industrial power that kept the lifeline open. The same principle applies today. Logistics, those convoys crossing the Atlantic, the heavy equipment pre-positioned in Europe, the sheer ability to move and sustain forces, that is NATO's hidden weapon. It's not glamorous like stealth bombers or aircraft carriers, but it decides wars. What I find most striking is how quickly shock turns into unity. The chaos of the first strike becomes the glue that binds allies even tighter. NATO awakens not as a political club, but as a war machine, and that changes the entire balance of the battlefield. And this leads us to the most dangerous flashpoints, the front lines themselves. Because once NATO is awake, Russia, China, and Iran must press their offensives before the window closes. So let's look at the battlefronts, from the Baltic to Taiwan to the Strait of Hormuz, where the real test of strength begins.
Now the story shifts to the places where steel meets fire, the battlefronts. This is where strategy becomes survival. Let's begin in Europe. Russian armor pushes through the Suwalki Gap, that narrow stretch of land between Poland and Lithuania, which has always been NATO's nightmare scenario. Columns of T-90 tanks thunder down highways, supported by Belarusian artillery. For a tense week, it looks like Riga or Vilnius might fall. But NATO doesn't stand still. Polish Abrams tanks dig in, German Leopards roll east, and British brigades reinforce Estonia. Above them, NATO fighters dominate the skies. By the second month, Operation Iron Avalanche surges forward, a massive counteroffensive that begins to look eerily like the reversal of the Ardennes in World War II. Russian units start burning on highways, supply lines collapse, and the advance stalls. For Moscow, the gamble has failed. Meanwhile, the Pacific becomes a storm of its own. Chinese amphibious ships push toward Taiwan, their decks packed with soldiers, armor, and supplies. On paper, it looks overwhelming, but this is where American and Japanese forces slam the door. Virginia-class submarines prowl the strait, slipping beneath the waves to ambush Chinese landing ships. Stealth bombers cut through the night sky, blasting coastal missile batteries. Japanese F-35s fly alongside American Raptors, wearing down the PLA Air Force sortie by sortie. I always think of Normandy when I imagine this scenario. An amphibious invasion is not won by courage alone. It lives or dies on logistics. And the hard truth for Beijing is that supply lines across the Taiwan Strait are fragile, exposed, and constantly under attack. By mid-year, dozens of Chinese ships are sunk, and what began as a bold offensive turns into a disaster of isolation. Taiwan holds. And then there is the Gulf, a flashpoint we cannot ignore. Iran's opening strike rattles the region. Missiles fly, fast boats scatter mines across the Strait of Hormuz, and oil prices spike overnight. But just as in the 1980s tanker war, the U.S. Navy adapts. Carriers in the Arabian Sea launch daily raids, Bandar Abbas burns, and Iranian naval bases are reduced to smoking wreckage. Saudi patriots and Israeli intelligence help knock down what's left of Iran's missile arsenal. Within months, convoys move again through the strait under heavy escort. Mines are cleared, and Iran's navy is gone. Its proxies still fire rockets, but without resupply, their power fades. To me, what's striking across these three fronts is a pattern. The aggressors land the first blow, but they can't sustain it. NATO, America, and their allies absorb the shock, then push back with depth, coordination, and endurance. And that endurance, the ability to fight not just in one place, but across oceans, across continents, that's what tips the balance. So the question becomes, if the battlefields are burning and the offensives are failing, what happens to the coalition that started this war? And that takes us to the next part of the story, the unraveling of BRICS.
At first, the strike feels unstoppable. China launches missiles across the Pacific, Russia surges tanks into the Baltics, and Iran lights the Gulf on fire. But wars are not decided in the opening hour. They are decided in the long grind that follows. And this is where the giants begin to bleed. China, for all its massive navy and missile arsenal, runs into the one weakness no weapon can cover: fuel. With the blockade tightening, oil shipments stall, factories slow and then stop. The country that built its reputation on being the world's workshop suddenly finds its machines silent. Russia, meanwhile, discovers the limits of brute force. Its economy, already strained by sanctions, begins to collapse under the weight of war. Tanks and artillery are plentiful on paper, but without steady supply lines, without advanced electronics and spare parts, they become iron coffins abandoned on Baltic highways. Iran, so loud in its opening volley, finds its naval bases in ruins, its proxies cut off, and its air force grounded. And perhaps the most telling sign of weakness is that the so-called coalition itself fractures. India, Brazil, and South Africa, countries often lumped into the BRICS bloc, keep their distance. They know the cost of going all in against the United States and NATO. Their trade ties, their economies, even their political stability depend on staying neutral. What began as a picture of unity dissolves into isolated players, each bleeding alone. Here's my view. Power is not just about how many ships you have in the water or how many missiles you can launch. True power is about endurance, about sustaining war when the easy victories are gone. And endurance requires allies, industry, and legitimacy. The BRICS partners lacked all three. History is full of examples, from Nazi Germany overstretching in World War II to the Soviet Union bleeding out in Afghanistan. Ambition without sustainability is a recipe for collapse. That's why I think this scenario matters. It shows us that even the largest giants can falter if they don't prepare for the long war. And that sets the stage for the final question. If BRICS is broken and the offensives have failed, what does the world look like after the dust settles? That's where we turn next.
1 year later, the battlefield looks nothing like it did on that terrifying first night. Guam's runways are repaired, Taiwan is still standing, and NATO troops once again patrol free Baltic capitals. The Strait of Hormuz, once sealed with fire and mines, is open under heavy escort. But for the nations that launched this war, the cost is catastrophic. Russia's army is gutted, its economy in freefall, and Belarus teeters on the edge of collapse. China's factories slow to a crawl as oil imports dry up, and its navy, battered and forced to hide near its own shores, no longer projects power across the Pacific. Iran has lost its navy, its air force, and the aura of intimidation it spent decades building. And here is what stands out to me. The United States and NATO, though bloodied, remain. They prove that endurance, alliances, and industrial depth matter more than the shock of a first strike. The lesson echoes from history. Just as the Allies emerged stronger after the darkest days of World War II, a coordinated defense today would not just survive, it would shape the next global order. That order would be one where America still commands the seas, NATO still defends Europe, and authoritarian states find themselves weaker for having tested the resolve of democracies. But the real question isn't just who wins the war, it's what comes after. Supply chains will shift, defense budgets will surge, and entire regions will rethink their security. Taiwan becomes more than an island, it becomes the front line of freedom in the Pacific. Eastern Europe hardens into a fortress, and the Middle East recalibrates once again. We are left with a world more divided, more militarized, and more on edge than before. And I believe that's the true danger. Victory doesn't end the cycle, it only sets the stage for the next challenge. So what do we take away from this? That in modern warfare, the side with patience, resilience, and allies has the advantage. Shock fades, but strategy lasts. And if history is any guide, America's greatest strength isn't just its weapons, it's the unity it can build when the world turns dark. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe a conflict like this could actually unfold, or is it simply too risky for anyone to attempt? And if you love exploring military history, strategy, and the realities of modern warfare, give this video a like, subscribe, and share it with others who care about these questions. Because the more we understand the past and prepare for the future, the better chance we all have when the next storm comes.